When darkness comes, it is then time to see light. Today, it's wonderful to have you here. I'm Pastor John from Living Stones in Sunland, Tujunga Seventh-day Adventist Churches, and it is time for the call to prayer. Directly following the last story that we experienced last week in the call to prayer, the story where there was this prophecy that prepared the early Christian church for hard times, we are now going to discover some of those hard times, because as hard times come to Rome because of things happening that are wrong, this is what we're going to discover today. Darkness must come for light to approach. In our lives, we always want good times to happen. We always wish for things that are well for us, our friends, and our family, and our church, and for God's people. We always want that. But true light cannot come when there is no darkness. Let's read together in the book of Acts, starting with chapter 12. It was about the time of the king Herod arrested. Now, this is Herod Agrippa. Herod Agrippa was something else, that guy. And so it was about the time for Herod. He arrested some of the church people and intended to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword. So now we have the first. Remember, there was the first person to die. The first martyr that is mentioned is Stephanos, remember? And of course, we know that Saul was the one that had done that. But then comes a new kind of a persecution, one that isn't from just the temple and the Sadducees especially, which were the political / religious leaders of the temple, basically the religious left in Israel. The Pharisees were more the religious right. But then comes persecution from the king himself, Herod. The king who was the one that was in charge of Israel. The procurator was the Roman procurator, but Herod was a local leader that Rome kind of let puppet lead the land of Israel. So Herod takes James and kills him with the sword. James, the son of John. You know the sons of Zebedee we hear about? There's John, who's one of the apostles of Jesus, and then James, who's one of the apostles of Jesus. These two were brothers, the sons of Zebedee. But James is killed. Yakub, in Hebrew or in Aramaic, is the word Yakub, which is translated into the Greek. It's James. It's but Yakub, but it's James in English. It comes across as. So James is killed, and he's put to death with the sword. And when they saw this, that it meant approval of the Jewish people, or should I say the Jewish leadership, then King Herod took a whole bunch of others, including Peter. Remember, the last story of Peter was with Cornelius. Remember that guy Cornelius that was Greek, or should I say Roman? He was not Jewish. And Peter said that God, how can I stop someone who believes in God? How can I stop them from being baptized when God calls? So now, what he receives for baptizing the non-Jew is that he gets put in prison to be killed as well. Now, this is a dark time. Imagine the early Christians as they know the apostles are there. James, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, dies at the sword of a horrible man named Herod Agrippa. And then Peter is put in jail. It says here, this happened during the time of the festival of unleavened bread. That means Passover time. After arresting him, he put him into prison. Herod put Peter in prison. and handing him over to the guards of the 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod then intended to bring him out to public for a trial just after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, and the church began to pray earnestly for Peter. Dark times. These are the times right now where this prophecy has just happened for last week. Remember last week's episode? The prophecy was given, and Saul and Barnabas are now on their way to Jerusalem to bring help for the early Christians in Jerusalem. At the same time, in Jerusalem, Peter is arrested after James had been slaughtered. Dark times had come upon. In our lives, when darkness reigns, we see this as bad, which it is bad. Actually, it's not good to have any one of our brothers or sisters die. But you know, well, I'm about to say it. Let me back up a second. When I was at seminary, a good friend of mine, Joe Sirigliano. How you doing, Joe? Hope you're here on the video. Joe said something very cool when we were at seminary. We were talking about something, I don't remember exactly what, but all of a sudden Joe says, you know, it seems to me that every time persecution happens, the Christian church becomes better in some way. So maybe we should start praying for persecution. And that perked my ears up, and everyone starts laughing. We were at the seminary in the main area, this kind of like amphitheater place, and we all start laughing. And that's Joe for you. You know, he's a cool guy, and it hit me. You know, Joe's right. We always pray for good times. We always pray for everything working exactly the way we want it. But you know what? Unless there's darkness in a room, a lot of times people will never see any light. When things are good, everything's great. But when things become dark, it's easy to see where the light is. Times like we're living in right now, times which are negative, and there's all these worries and all this fear. It's bad. But actually, if you're on God's side, it can reinforce your faith. And then churches who really believe in God will be seen for what they are, instead of just another church among many. I'm not saying that it's good to have bad things happen. What I'm saying is that it is evident who is good when bad things happen. My friends, next week's episode, we will talk for a moment about how that light breaks and how things happen and how we are blind to it when it happens. But let's face the facts. Sometimes it takes darkness for us human beings to see light. We have a choice when darkness falls. The choice either is to become the darkness, as Martin Luther King said, you can't allow yourself to become the darkness. This is the problem with social justice. Social justice oftentimes becomes the very darkness that it says it fights against. How do you end prejudice? Be prejudiced against someone else. No. Revenge is not light. It's just more darkness. But becoming a light in the darkness is something that's inside your heart. You can't allow the darkness to succumb you to drown in it so that you can't breathe anymore. Instead, you need to become the light that this world so needs in the time of darkness. At night, when you're driving down the road, a light from the front of a car can be seen, especially in places like the arid desert where there's long areas of flat. A light can be seen from miles away. Though the person inside the car cannot see ahead of them much more than maybe 25 to 30 feet, others can see that light from miles away. In fact, it could be seen from outer space. When darkness reigns, light is obvious. Why am I saying this today? Let your light so shine, Jesus said. Don't hide it under a bushel, but instead put it out on the table so that everyone can see. Not to say we're important, for that light must come from Jesus, not from ourselves. But that light needs to burn from within us, outside through us, so that others may see God and his works and discover where they are in their lives. You can be a light of this world to shine in the darkness so that the darkness cannot understand or overtake it. So, we're going to have, in the next few moments, we're going to have intercession, which is our prayer time. Please stay with me. And remember to smash that like button. Subscribe over here. Subscribe away. And put the little dingle bell so that you know when it's time for another video to come up. This is for you to be able to connect with God, with yourself, with your church, and with others. May God bless you, and I'll see you in a few moments for intercession.